Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub. Tonight, we dive into the chilling depths of H.G. Wells' tale, The Sea Raiders. Reimagined in English for a fresh, suspenseful experience, this is not just a retelling, it's a haunting new vision of terror from the deep. Until that strange and terrible episode at Sidmouth, the creature known as Haploteuthis ferox existed only as rumor in the halls of science. A half-digested tentacle washed ashore near the Azores, a rotting carcass torn by gulls at Land's End. Nothing more than fragments, whispers from the abyss. The deep-sea cephalopods have always been mysteries wrapped in darkness. Even the Prince of Monaco's famed discovery in 1895 came by sheer accident. A dying sperm whale, harpooned off Terceira, thrashed in its final agony and vomited forth a cargo of monstrous shapes. Tentacles, bodies, fragments, creatures of staggering size unknown to man. The prince, realizing their importance, spun his yacht's screws to trap them in the swirling water until his men could haul them aboard. Thus, science glimpsed, for the briefest moment, the hidden kingdom of the abyss. But such revelations are rare. These agile hunters of the mid-depths are too swift for nets, too elusive for study. And so, the true home of Haploteuthis ferox remains a secret, as unknowable as the spawning grounds of the herring or the wandering paths of the salmon. Why it appeared suddenly upon our coast, no zoologist can say. Hunger migration, perhaps, or some deeper force driving it upward from the black waters. What is certain is this: the first living specimen ever seen by human eyes, the first sighting to leave a survivor, occurred in early May, when a retired tea dealer named Mr. Fison, lodging quietly at a Sidmouth boarding house, stumbled upon a nightmare that had already claimed countless swimmers and boatmen along the shores of Cornwall and Devon. It was late in the afternoon when Mr. Fison wandered along the cliff path between Sidmouth and Ladram Bay. The cliffs here rose sheer and crimson, their faces carved by time, with a precarious ladder-like staircase descending toward the sea. He was near this descent when something caught his eye. A flicker of movement far below, a shimmer of pinkish-white glistening in the sun. At first, he thought it nothing more than birds squabbling over scraps of food tossed upon the rocks. The tide had retreated, leaving a vast expanse of jagged reefs draped in black seaweed, broken only by pools of silver light. The brightness of the water beyond dazzled his vision, making the scene difficult to read. Yet, as he looked again, his first judgment faltered. The birds, jackdaws and gulls, wheeled and shrieked above the object, their wings flashing like blades in the sunlight. Compared to the thing below, they seemed pitifully small, hesitant to draw near as though fear restrained them. Curiosity stirred in him, stronger now for the mystery. Perhaps he thought it was a great fish stranded by chance, thrashing in its death throes. With nothing better to occupy his afternoon, he resolved to investigate. He descended the long, steep staircase, pausing every 30 feet to catch his breath and study the strange commotion. At the foot of the cliff, the object loomed against the blazing sky, its details obscured by glare. The pinkish gleam was hidden now behind a cluster of weed-covered boulders. But Fison could see enough. 7 rounded forms, distinct yet somehow connected, shifting with a dreadful vitality. The birds screamed and croaked above, but none dared approach too closely. Driven by a mix of dread and fascination, Fison picked his way across the slippery rocks. The seaweed clung thickly, treacherous underfoot. He stopped, stripped off his shoes and socks, and rolled his trousers to his knees. It was a simple precaution, meant only to keep him from stumbling into the tidal pools. Yet in that small act, barefoot upon the rocks, boyish once more, he unknowingly took the step that would save his life. Fison advanced with the calm assurance of a man convinced his homeland was safe from all savage beasts. The shapes before him shifted lazily, round bodies gliding to and fro. But as he climbed over the jagged ridge of boulders, the truth struck him like a blow. The sight was sudden, shocking, an image carved forever into memory. The clustered forms parted, revealing what they had concealed, the half-devoured remains of a human being. Whether man or woman, Fison could not tell. Around the corpse writhed the creatures unlike anything he had ever imagined, ghastly parodies of octopuses, their bodies the size of swine, their tentacles long and sinuous, coiling across the rocks in obscene abundance. Their skin gleamed with a slick, leathery sheen, unpleasant to behold, and their eyes, large, intelligent, and disturbingly human, stared with a grotesque suggestion of a face. 7, perhaps 8 of them crouched upon the reef, and beyond, in the surf of the returning tide, 2 more slithered from the sea. They lay flat against the stone, watching him with a terrible, deliberate interest. Yet Fison, astonishingly, felt no fear. Their limp posture deceived him, and indignation rose instead, revulsion at such monstrous things feasting upon human flesh. Believing they had merely stumbled upon a drowned body, he shouted, hoping to drive them away. When they did not move, he seized a heavy stone and hurled it at one of the beasts. The response was immediate. Tentacles uncoiled, slow and deliberate, and the creatures began to creep toward him, uttering a strange, soft purring sound to one another. In that instant, Fison understood. He was prey. Panic surged. He shouted again, flung his boots in desperation, and leapt back across the rocks. For a moment, he thought himself safe, 20 yards distant. But when he turned, horror gripped him. The leader's tentacles were already spilling over the ridge where he had stood, reaching for him with dreadful speed. Fison's cry was no longer defiant. It was the desperate shout of a man who understood his peril. He leapt, stumbled, and waded across the treacherous reef, the red cliffs towering impossibly far away, as though retreating into another world. High above, 2 unsuspecting workmen tinkered with the ladderway, oblivious to the nightmare unfolding below. Behind him, the creatures splashed through tidal pools, closing the distance with dreadful persistence. Once he slipped, nearly falling into their grasp. They pursued him to the very foot of the cliffs, halting only when the workmen rushed down to his aid. Stones rained upon the beasts, driving them back for a time. Breathless and shaken, the 3 men scrambled up the ladder and along the path to Sidmouth, intent on raising help and reclaiming the desecrated body from those abominations. Yet Fison, reckless in his resolve, insisted on returning with a boat to mark the place of his ordeal. The tide was low, forcing a long detour, and when at last they reached the ladderway, the mangled corpse was gone. The sea crept steadily inward, swallowing the slimy rocks one by one. The 4 men, the boatman, the 2 workmen, and Fison himself, turned their gaze downward, peering into the water beneath the keel. At first, they saw only a forest of kelp swaying in the current, with the occasional flicker of a fish darting through. Their spirits sagged, disappointment spilling into words. But then, a shape. One of the monsters glided seaward, its body rolling with a strange balloon-like motion that chilled Fison's blood. Moments later, the kelp thrashed violently, parting to reveal 3 more of the creatures, writhing together over some grisly prize. In an instant, the olive ribbons closed again, hiding the horror beneath. Excitement surged.
The men beat the water with their oars, shouting into the wind. The weeds erupted in tumult, then stilled. And when the surface smoothed, they saw it, an image that froze their hearts. The sea floor, veiled in kelp, seemed alive with eyes. Countless eyes, watching from the shadows of the deep.
"Ugly swine," one of the men shouted. "There's dozens of them." And then, as if summoned by the cry, the sea itself erupted. From the swaying meadows of kelp, eyes gleamed, scores of them, rising in a sudden dreadful bloom. To Fisson, the moment stretched into eternity, though in truth it lasted only seconds. First the eyes, then the tentacles, streaming outward, tearing the weeds apart, until the seabed vanished beneath a writhing mass of interlocking forms. Dark tips of tentacles broke the surface, swaying above the swell like serpents tasting the air. One creature surged boldly to the boat, fastening 3 sucker-lined arms to the hull, while 4 more whipped over the gunwale, clawing for purchase as though to overturn the vessel or drag itself aboard. Fisson seized the boat hook, stabbing furiously at the slick flesh until the beast recoiled. At the same instant, the boatman, striking at another attacker with his oar, stumbled against Fisson's back, nearly pitching him into the sea. Then, as suddenly as they had come, the tentacles slid away, splashing back into the depths. "We'd better get out of this," Fisson gasped, trembling violently. He seized the tiller, while the boatman and 1 workman bent to the oars. The other stood at the bow, boat hook raised, grimly prepared for the next assault. No words followed. None were needed. The silence was heavy, faces pale and drawn, each man consumed by the same thought: escape. But scarcely had the oars dipped into the water before new horrors struck. Dark, tapering ropes coiled around the rudder, binding it fast. Tentacles looped upward along the sides of the boat, suckers clinging with dreadful persistence. The men pulled with all their strength, but it was like dragging a vessel through a raft of living weeds. "Help here!" the boatman cried, and Fisson, with the second workman, rushed to seize the oar, straining against the monstrous grip of the sea raiders. Ewan, his name remembered in curses, sprang to his feet, boat hook raised, and struck furiously into the water. The iron tip lashed at the writhing mass of tentacles, now coiling beneath the boat, each blow a desperate attempt to drive them back. At the same time, the 2 rowers rose, straining for leverage as they fought to reclaim their oars. The boatman thrust his own into Fisson's hands, while with the other he snapped open a clasp knife and leaned dangerously over the side, hacking at the spiraling arms that clung to the shaft like living ropes.
The boat rocked violently, quivering under the assault. Fisson staggered, teeth clenched, breath ragged, veins bulging as he hauled at the oar. Then his eyes lifted seaward and froze. Not 50 yards away, across the rolling tide, another boat approached. In it sat 3 women and a child. Their laughter carried faintly on the wind. A boatman rowed, while a small man in a straw hat with a pink ribbon stood in the stern, cheerfully hailing them. For a heartbeat, Fisson thought of rescue. Then he thought of the child. Terror surged. He abandoned his oar, flung up his arms, and screamed across the waves, "Keep away, for God's sake!" The oar vanished instantly, dragged beneath by unseen hands, only to bob up again 20 yards distant. But Fisson had no time to watch. The boat lurched savagely, and a hoarse, prolonged scream tore through the air. Hill, the boatman, crouched at the forward rowlock, his face twisted in agony, his right arm wrenched downward into the sea. His cries came sharp and broken. "Oh! Oh! Oh! Oh!" each one a stab of terror. Fisson believed Hill had been seized while hacking at the tentacles below the waterline, though certainty was impossible. The vessel heeled dangerously, Goonwell dipping within inches of the tide. Ewan and the other laborers struck wildly at the water, oar and boathook flashing down on either side of Hill's trapped arm. Instinctively, Fisson shifted his weight, bracing himself to counterbalance the frantic struggle as the boat teetered on the edge of disaster. Hill, broad-shouldered and powerful, fought with all his strength. He rose nearly upright, dragging his arm clear of the water. A grotesque tangle of brown tentacles clung to him, and for an instant the glaring eyes of one of the beasts broke the surface, fixed upon him with dreadful resolve. The boat lurched, tilting steeply, as green-brown water cascaded over the side. Hill slipped, ribs crashing against the gunwale, and his arm, entwined with the writhing mass, splashed back into the sea. In the chaos, his boot struck Fisson's knee as the latter rushed forward. Then, in a heartbeat, fresh coils lashed around Hill's waist and throat. After a brief convulsive struggle that nearly capsized the vessel, he was dragged screaming into the depths. The boat snapped upright with a violent jerk, hiding the horror beneath the waves.
Fisson staggered, fighting for balance, and realized the tide had carried them perilously close to the weed-covered rocks. Not 4 yards away, a flat table of stone rose and fell with the rhythm of the surf. Seizing Ewan's oar, Fisson gave one desperate stroke, then abandoned it, sprinted to the bow, and leaped. His feet skidded across the slick rock. With frantic effort, he hurled himself onward to another mass, stumbled to his knees, and rose again. "Look out!" someone cried. A heavy drab body slammed into him, knocking him flat into a tidal pool. As he went down, muffled, choking cries reached his ears. Sounds he believed belonged to Hill, though their shrillness and variety seemed uncanny. Foam surged over him in a rushing wave. As another man vaulted past, drenched and trembling, Fisson scrambled upright, and without daring a glance seaward, fled across the scattered rocks. Ahead, the 2 surviving workmen stumbled onward, one a dozen yards before the other, all 3 driven by sheer terror toward the shore. At last, Fisson dared a glance over his shoulder. No pursuit. He stopped, turned, and stood astonished. From the moment the cephalopods had risen from the sea, he had acted too swiftly to comprehend his own terror. Now, it was as though he had awakened from a nightmare. The sky blazed cloudless in the afternoon sun. The sea shimmered under its merciless glare. Foam broke softly upon the rocks, and the boat, upright once more, drifted gently on the swell, only yards from shore. Hill was gone. The monsters were gone. The chaos, the struggle, the screams, all vanished as if they had never been. Fisson's heart thundered, his breath ragged, his body trembling to the fingertips. Something was missing. He scanned the horizon. Sun, sky, sea, rocks, and then remembered. The excursion boat. The women. The child. It had vanished. Had he imagined it? He turned and saw the 2 surviving workmen, pale and shaken, standing beneath the towering pink cliffs. He hesitated, torn between one last attempt to save Hill and the crushing weight of helplessness. His strength deserted him. Aimless, he stumbled shoreward, wading toward his companions. When he looked back again, 2 boats floated upon the tide. One, farthest out, pitched clumsily, bottom upward. The truth was undeniable. Haplotheutus ferox had come to the Devonshire coast. This was its most savage assault yet.
Fison's testimony, together with the wave of boating and bathing deaths and the eerie absence of fish along Cornwall shores, pointed to a shoal of these ravenous deep-sea predators prowling the coastline. Some claimed hunger migration had driven them here. Others, like Hemsley, argued a darker theory, that a shipwreck had first offered them human flesh and that they had followed the Atlantic traffic ever since, drawn by the taste of man. Whatever the cause, the sea had revealed its secret, and it was a secret steeped in horror. It seemed the shoal's hunger had been sated with 11 souls, 10 from the second boat and Hill among them. After that, the creatures gave no further sign off Sidmouth that day. The coast between Seaton and Budleigh Salterton bristled with vigilance. Preventative service boats armed with harpoons and cutlasses patrolled the waters, joined by private expeditions eager to defend the shore. Yet Mr. Fison, shaken and hollow, took no part in these pursuits. Near midnight, cries rang out from a vessel 2 miles southeast of Sidmouth. A lantern swung wildly, signaling alarm. Boats converged, and the shaken occupants, a seaman, a curate, and 2 schoolboys, spoke in broken fragments of what they had seen. The monsters had passed beneath their craft, glowing faintly in the black water. Phosphorescent, like creatures of moonlight, they drifted 5 fathoms deep, tentacles drawn in, rolling slowly in wedge-like formation toward the southeast. The vision was brief, but unforgettable. Soon, 8 or 9 boats clustered together, voices rising in a confused tumult that echoed across the still night sea. Yet none dared pursue. Lacking weapons, lacking experience, the men turned shoreward, relieved perhaps to leave the shoal to its mystery. And here lies the most astonishing fact of all. The subsequent movements of the shoal remain unknown. The entire southwest coast stood alert, yet no further trace was found. Perhaps it is significant that a great whale stranded off Sark on June 3, and 2 weeks later, on the sands of Calais, a living Haploteuthis was seen. Witnesses swore its tentacles writhed convulsively, though the creature was dying. A gentleman named Pochette fetched a rifle and ended its struggles with a single shot. Thus ended the raid of Sidmouth, an episode that revealed, for a fleeting moment, the abyssal horrors that lurk beneath the calm surface of the sea. And though the waves closed over them, leaving no trace, the memory of those eyes, those tentacles, and that insatiable hunger lingers still. That was the last time a living Haploteuthis was seen. None appeared again along the French coast. On June 15th, a carcass, nearly whole, washed ashore near Torquay. Days later, a dredging boat from the Marine Biological Station at Plymouth hauled up another specimen, rotting and scarred by a deep cutlass wound. How the first met its death remains a mystery. And on the final day of June, tragedy struck once more. Egbert Kane, an artist bathing near Newlyn, suddenly threw up his arms, shrieked, and was dragged beneath the waves. His companion, overcome with terror, fled for the shore without attempting a rescue. That grim episode marked the last known fact of this extraordinary raid from the deeper sea. Whether it truly was the end of these horrors, no one can yet say. But it is believed and fervently hoped that the creatures have returned to the sunless depths of the mid-ocean, to the black waters from which they so strangely and mysteriously arose. The sea has claimed its secrets once more, leaving only fear, silence, and the memory of eyes that watched from the abyss.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, Do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.